I'm here. Thank you.
So I lost my pen.
You must be a veteran of
So anytime you have to go. Just waiting for the order to start. Okay, I decide to start. With the power I have from my position as a moderator, I decide we can start. Good afternoon, everybody, ladies and gentlemen. In October 1991, as a young correspondent, I was in Madrid at the first conference about a possible peace process between Israelis and Palestinians. At Christmas, I was in Washington, D.C. for the bilateral meetings. I got Christmas shopping, because the bilateral meeting was for nothing. And then 2 years after, I went back to D.C., still young, to follow the sign ceremony of the White House of the Oslo Agreement, incredibly made by Norway, because only Norway would be able to make a sort of a peace process between the Palestinians and the Israelis. Now I'm an old retired journalist, and still we have no sign of peace or compromise, no negotiations, and apparently no hope. Perhaps, maybe, a third intifada in the making. The Palestinian leadership reminds me, I was Moscow correspondent also on the Soviet Union, it reminds me of Soviet gerontocracy, unable to create something new, and while the Palestinian population is one of the youngest on Earth. In the Israeli new government, my goodness, the most national religious of the Israeli history, Itamar Ben-Gvir, so I will have to learn his name. It's difficult. I find some difficulty to.
You don't want to learn it.
Itamar Ben-Gvir is going to become the Minister of National Security with some special power on the occupied territories. In his mind, maybe he feels himself as a new Caesar of Judea and Samaria. Let me quote, just to complete the framework, the last poll commissioned by the United States Institute of Peace to Dalia Scheindlin and Khalil Shikaki, an Israeli and a Palestinian scholars, very important scholars. It's about the attitude of Israelis and Palestinians aged between 15 and 21 years old. More than in previous generations, they say, majorities of both sides reject the other's historical connection to the land, oppose a two-state solution, and believe the other side only understands force. The young Israeli and Palestinian between 15 and 21. What went wrong in those 3 decades? What is going to happen now? And is there a chance to rebuild at least a sort of diplomatic horizon? Can the economy, for some extent, alleviate or even promote the absence of a political solution? So we will discuss about this. The title of our meeting, that is a quest for peace and development. The headline we get to our today dialogue perhaps is too optimistic. Anyway, we will discuss with Dalal Erekat, assistant professor of conflict resolution at the Arab-Israeli University in Ramallah. And let me add that Mrs. Dalal, she's the daughter of Saeb Erekat, that by definition, the Palestinian peace negotiator since the beginning. And I personally remember, sorry if I say that, I don't know, it's the past. When we were in Madrid, Itzhak Shamir didn't want to see a Palestinian delegation. The Palestinians were inside the Jordanian delegation. And Saeb went to the hall with the Palestinian keffiyeh on his shoulders, just to remember that Palestinians were there despite Itzhak Shamir. Then we talked with Sven Koopmans, the European Union Special Representative for the Middle East peace process. And let me say, I like very much the uncompromising optimism of the bureaucracy in Brussels, that they still call a failure peace process in Middle East, by definition, a chaotic region like Middle East. But anyway, I like it, really, I like it. And Gideon Levy, I mean, it's something more than a journalist of Haaretz. Gideon, for many extent, represents the, could I say, the soul of the democratic Israel. Last month, he received the Sokolov Prize, which is the most important award for a journalist in Israel. Mabruk.
Thank you.
Dalal, I'll start with you. As a Palestinian living in occupied territories, what do you think about the Israeli government? What is going to happen, in your opinion?
Well, thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be with you here, and thanks to the Foreign Ministry and to SP for holding such dialogues. I would like to spin your question and start with the obstacles to the peace process. And in case you guys don't know, we don't have a peace process in the Middle East. You know, the peace process had been put on hold since 2014. But I would like to look at the stalemate and try to look at strategic exit strategies of where should we go from here? What was the main obstacle? And I think it's important to highlight the settler colonial system under the umbrella of the Israeli occupation that had been in place for 74 years now is the main and remaining the main obstacle to the peace process ever since the peace process had started. So for 30 years now, the settler colonial system that is being in place, you know, for 74 years we've been witnessing the crimes of apartheid against the Palestinian people. Now it's documented. The crimes against the humanity, confiscations of lands on daily basis, settlements expansions, extrajudicial killings. Up until yesterday, last morning, since January 22, in Palestine, we have 210 martyrs. Those lives, mostly youth, have been murdered by the Israeli occupation forces just in 10, 11 months. So the fact that Israel and the settler colonial system is going on and carrying on their crimes against the Palestinian people, and let alone, of course, the forced displacement eviction orders that are taking place in Jerusalem and the West Bank and Sheikh Jarrah. I'm sure you've all heard about Sheikh Jarrah and about the extrajudicial killing against the fine journalist Shireen Abu Akleh. I'm just giving you examples to let you know and to give you more evidence by proof that the Palestinians, no matter what you believe in, no matter if you belong to Fatah or Hamas, to Gaza, to the West Bank, if you're a male, a female, whatever social layer you come from, every Palestinian is target to the Israeli occupation machine. And I say that because it's been 74 years, and now the Israeli government is going very extreme, very right, and very violent. It should not be contested today, in 2022, that the settler colonial system is the main obstacle. Obstacle number two that I have to shed light upon today, and this is a very positive criticism to the EU and to the UN member states and to the international community that came up 30 years ago with the proposition of the two-state solution. You know, this rhetoric, this lip service of the two-state solution should come to an end. The international community has two options. They either recognize the Palestinian state immediately, as they did with the other state for 74 years now, or they should refrain from their advocacy and verbal rhetoric service towards the two-state solution. Because in reality, whether we like it or not, unfortunately, we are witnessing an apartheid reality of one state, one racist state against the Palestinian people. Thank you.
Shukran. Sven, assuming we don't have a political process, what the economy can do and what the European Union can do on this field?
Well, first, of course, thank you, like you did. Thank you very much for the invitation and for being here. But I don't want to dodge the question. In fact, I want to go beyond it. There is no political process, and you're right. And your her ironic comment about me being the EU special representative for a peace process that doesn't exist is correct. But I see then that I've been given this job to actually make it meaningful, to make sure that there is a peace process. It does not exist at the moment. And so I hope that we can also talk a bit about how we're going to revive the peace process. But your question now is about what can we do while there is no peace process on the economic and maybe the development front. There the European Union is and has been for as long as it's possible, very engaged. The European Union plus member states are by far the biggest donor to all Palestinian causes. We are also, of course, at the same time, the biggest trading partner for Israel, which also, I believe, should give us a reasonable basis to have discussions about the political things, but we'll get to that later. Right now, though, we do enormous amounts of things. We, as in collectively Europeans. We fund UNRWA reliably and massively. We have to do that with others, but sometimes I'm a little bit surprised that the Europeans actually take by far the biggest chunk of this. Why not some others? We also set up many development projects on the ground, and we work together with Palestinian business leaders to engage and to help them. Also very practical things about having scanners on the borders to enable that, but also to pressure Israel to allow for Palestinian export also from the Gaza Strip. There are many of these things, and we invest in education. But then I was very sad, for instance, to hear this weekend that a school that actually Italy has built, at least with Italian money, has built in the southern Hebron Hills, Massafiatta, was destroyed. This is a school for kids. They were actually in class, and they were sent out for their building to be demolished. I think we all need to invest in education alongside with many other things for the sake itself of improving people's lives. But I would say, not to take too much time right now, that we can work on these things, development projects, schools and hospitals and trade facilitation and so on, and we need to. But what is it worth if in the end it gets blown up in a war, in an intifada, or in just a targeted demolition? Or if terrorists use the school to hide behind to stage attacks? The only way in which we can do this sustainably and meaningfully for the long term is if we also work on a peace process. And we cannot accept, and I do not accept, and I think the reason I was appointed, I mean, at least my post was created and maintained to talk about the peace process, to work on the peace process, is because we believe there has to be a peace process. And I refuse, as I think everybody else here, I refuse to accept what some people say, yes, there is no peace partner. People can say there is no peace partner. And maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong, but it's not an argument. It's not enough. There has to be a peace process, and even if there is not a peace partner that you like, you still need to do your own work. And that's what I propose to do. So in addition to the economic things that we have to talk about, we also need to do the big political things.
Sure. Thank you. Gideon, I always believed that the integration of Israel into the region would have been an essential tool to solve also the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But living in Jerusalem, I realized that what the large majority of the Israelis are thinking that is that the Arabs are not, they don't care anymore about the Palestinians, so we can do whatever we want with the Palestinians. Am I wrong?
How can you be wrong? Imagine yourself a condominium, a house with many apartments, and all of a sudden comes a new inhabitant to the house. Normally, you would try to create some kind of normal relations with the neighbors. But the new neighbor is behaving like a bully, doing anything to destroy the relationship. So you can't expect this house to function. I think that we are now in a stage in which we have to put an end to some of the lies that we all believed in them, or at least part of us. It's time to face the truth. And the truth is that the Israeli occupation is not temporary. It was never temporary. It was never aimed to be temporary, even though Israel claimed that it is temporary. But as long as we believe that this occupation is temporary, we could forgive Israel many things, because we knew that until there will be a Palestinian partner, until there will be the right time, until we will all be grown up enough and responsible enough, then we'll make this holy peace and the occupation will come to its end. I think 55 years are enough of a time to realize that this was never the plan. Now, this has many consequences, because if the occupation is not temporary, if it is here to stay, and it is here to stay, by the way, today the end of the occupation is much farther than 10 years ago, and even more far than 20 years ago. We are just getting farther and farther. I'm not here to spoil the party, I mean, of optimism and development and all this, but we have to face reality. If the occupation is not temporary, it means it is part and parcel of Israel. It means that we should stop to speak about the occupation, because military occupation has its own rules and has its own even benefits in a way, but this is over. We have to look at Israel with the occupied territories as one entity. And this leaves no room for doubts that we are dealing with an apartheid state. Because if the occupation is part of Israel, if Israel has two regimes, one for its Jewish citizens, one for the Palestinian inhabitants, it looks like apartheid, it plays like apartheid, it speaks apartheid, and it is apartheid. You cannot deal with it otherwise. As long as Israel was ready to discuss the future of the occupied territories, I wouldn't say it. I would say this is the dark side of Israel, the backyard. Everything is being done there on a temporary basis. Not anymore, not anymore. So this defines Israel. Now, if this defines Israel, we cannot deal with Israel anymore as a democracy. There is no democracy with a backyard with one of the most brutal military tyrannies on earth. And the military occupation is one of the most brutal tyrannies today in the world. I'm very responsible in what I say. It is a brutal tyranny. This nice face of Israel, of being democratic, of being this Western outpost of the EU, of the United States, the darling of the West, denies it, ignores it. The backyard defines the whole house. Can you see a situation in which half of Italy will be a dictatorship and half of Italy will be a democracy? Will you define Italy as a democracy? How can you? So we have to face the truth. And the truth is that the occupation is there to stay. It is an apartheid state. And now it is about the international community to decide, do we accept an apartheid state? Do we continue to hug an apartheid state? Do we continue to finance an apartheid state? Or are we willing to do what we did with the first apartheid state, namely South Africa? We, the international community, you, the international community, were very efficient about this first apartheid state. Why the rules are different for the second apartheid state? And that's the question which is really of the main challenge in such a conference, in other forums. The question is, are you willing to accept it? One thing, don't expect. The Israelis will not change the situation by their own will. There is no incentive for it. Life in Israel is great. Nobody speaks about the occupation. Nobody knows about the occupation. Nobody wants to hear about the occupation, even though it's half an hour away from our homes, yeah? Change will come in Israel only if Israelis will feel that they are paying a price, if they will feel that they are punished by the international community, this might be an incentive. No other incentive will make a change within Israel.
Thank you. So as Gideon let us to understand, in this story we have an occupier and occupied. This is pretty clear. But if the occupied is occupied is in this condition since half century, just start with the 67, but I could start even before, some serious mistake has been made by the occupied. Perhaps the most serious mistake is the incapability to reconciliation between Hamas on one side and Fatah and Palestinian Authority.
Thank you. Well, I need to acknowledge that we as Palestinians recognize that we have a number of setbacks, internally speaking. Yes, we need to work on our democracy, we need to reach unity and finish the divide and reach reconciliation. However, I teach diplomacy, I teach conflict resolution, I teach negotiations to graduate students at the Arab American University in Palestine. You know, I think one of the biggest mistakes that we have to acknowledge is that we have been treating negotiations as an end and not as a tool. And here is a reminder to all of you here in the room. Negotiations is just one tool to conflict resolution. We believe in negotiations, but it should not be our end goal. And here, the call from the EU and the UN and the international community member states to keep saying we need to bring the two parties back to the negotiating table, I think needs to be revisited. Why? So it's like, does it need a genius to realize that international legitimacy is existing on the 67 borderline, on the Palestinian right to self-determination? You know, Palestinians have more than 100 UN Security Council resolutions that safeguard our rights. We have more than 800 General Assembly resolutions that safeguard our rights. So here's the question to the international community member states again. Why don't we enforce all those resolutions that protect and safeguard the Palestinians' rights on the 67 borderline, in self-determination, the refugees issue, and so on? One more thing, that anybody who goes to school or to university learns about the Maslow pyramid of human needs. You know, when we speak about water, when we speak about electricity, and today in the 21st century when we speak about internet, oh my God, for God's sake, in Palestine we don't enjoy the 3G service. We're negotiating our rights. You know what I mean? You know, the 2022, it's a basic need for every human being to have internet services, let alone 4G and 5G. And in Gaza, they don't even have 2G. You know, 2 million people are imprisoned in a big prison. So I truly think, you know, the fact that we're still speaking about negotiations for the goal of negotiations is a big mistake. If we know international legitimacy, if we respect international law, I think it's very, very important for the Palestinians, for the Israelis, and for anybody who is really conscious and worried about bringing peace to the region, is to move from the micro approach to a more macro approach, where we look into the reality as the occupation that needs to end. And you know, apartheid is one segment of this occupation. Apartheid is a crime by international law definition. So if we look at the occupation as a macro, we start there. We start by ending the occupation, and then we can discuss the other details. I think that's a very, very important approach, an exit strategy, to let alone, to refrain from the step-by-step approach. You know, I'm not putting the blame on the Americans alone or the EU or the UN. It must be collective. And this takes me to another point where the process also needs to be inclusive. You know, Hamas included. Hamas are Palestinians at the end of the day. And you know, this division between Gaza and the West Bank should not be tolerated. And the continued Israeli occupation policies on the Palestinians in 22, deprivation of the basic human rights. We don't enjoy mobility rights, we don't enjoy worship rights, we don't have water, electricity, internet services, let alone all the other, you know, human rights. But there is something very important also. The fact that everybody is shifting towards the argument of human rights should not neglect the political rights. Our political rights are very important and are embedded in the international law and the international mechanisms. So yes, human rights, political rights, and economy is very important. A Marshall Plan is very much welcomed in Palestine. We love to prosper. We love to invest. We love to live like the world developed countries. Yes, why not? I imagine Gaza to be the Saint-Tropez of the Middle East, to be very honest. If you visit Gaza, if you see the resources, the waters, it could be developed into the Saint-Tropez of the Middle East. However, the focus on the economic path instead or in replacement of the political path is something that we should not accept. Not for me as a Palestinian, not for you as a European who is worried and concerned about bringing peace to the region. If anybody considers themselves allies to Israel, we should be looking strategically in 50 years' time, in 70 years' time. If we tolerate the crimes existing by the Israeli occupation regime, we will not see any peace or security or stability in the region unless the Palestinians are party to every negotiations, unless the EU, the Quartet, the UN, the US, solidify their mandate, not only into economy, culture, and communication and investments, but also to the political rights of human beings. One message that I wanted to end here with is that Palestinians need to be viewed as human beings, period. Like any Israeli, French, Chinese, American, no matter what. So if we start there, and if we, on the political level, start by ending the Israeli occupation, macro to micro, then I think that could be a good starting point.
Gideon, shortly, what is the worst Israeli mistake on this conflict? Just one.
If I'll be very sincere, and I will be, it's the way that the State of Israel was created. The sources are there. Not the fact that the State of Israel was created, but the way it was created. Because it all started in 48. If 48 would have ended then, I would say, à la guerre comme à la guerre, in wars, there are terrible things being done. Let's now finish the war and start a new chapter. But the same means and the same targets and the same aims of 48 are going with us until this very moment to try to push the Palestinians as much as we can to, we tried to have as many Jews and as little Palestinians in this country, and all the means are legitimate in the eyes of Israelis because we have those slogans, after the Holocaust, the Jews have the right to do whatever they want. We are fighting for our existence. They want to push us to the ocean, all those things that we were brought up on them. But by the end of the day, if we would have started in 48 in perceiving the fact that not a people without a land came to a land without a people, but the people without a land came to a land with a people who is very attached to this land, with a people who has all the rights on these lands, at least as the Jews have, at least, then the whole thing could have looked different. But in the 20s, don't even go to 48, because 48 is after the Holocaust. In the 20s, they are already pushing Palestinians from their jobs as a policy. We called it the conquer of work, the conquer of labor, or better, the occupation of labor. This was the term, occupation of labor, namely pushing the Palestinians from their jobs. If you come with those intentions, then all the mistakes you do after it are small, because the major mistake was not to realize that they have at least the same rights like we have. We never corrected it, never ever.
Yeah, in the latest Tom Segev biography on Ben Gurion, it was very clear on that. Yeah. Sven, I wanted to follow up for some extent what you said before. It is really impossible to breathe a new life of a political negotiation. And what did you learn from the past? For instance, perhaps it's possible that, for some extent, the Abraham Accord can be helpful, as the presence of Egyptians and Qataris in Gaza, for instance.
Mm-hmm. First, I'm not sure that I understood you correctly, but I would not say that a political process is impossible. I would say that right now, it is very unlikely that with the incoming Israeli government, the likely incoming Israeli government, and with the Palestinian situation as it is right now, that right now there would be this international conference set up. Imagine it would happen here next week. It would be a failure. And in that sense, yes, let's assume for the time being that is impossible. But that doesn't mean that the political process as such is impossible. Now, the Abraham Accords with the four countries, they did a few things. They showed that change is possible, and they have shown to Israelis and to some people in those countries they're concerned that improving ties has particular economic, personal benefits. But they have not done anything for the Palestinians. But they provide some inspiration, at least, for that change is possible. Now, it was said earlier that maybe I'm an optimist. I think in some way we are all optimists because we all believe that at some point the occupation will end. Understanding fully what you say. It is not intended, maybe by quite a few people, to end, but it will end in some way. Now, maybe that way will be terrible violence. I think we all want something else, and that's why we actually come to this panel, because we want something else. So we believe that something is possible. Now, we take the inspiration a little bit from those Abraham Accords. We also take the inspiration from the Arab Peace Initiative. It is still there after 20 years. And it provides some perspective. I think if you see before that the relations with Jordan and with Egypt and Israel, they have shown that change is possible and it can bring some contributions to improving the Palestinian life, but not enough. Because we still have the occupation, we still have the conflicts, and we still have people dying every day. And actually over the last few weeks, increasing numbers. It's horrible. So we have to work, at least from the European Union side, and yes, with our dear American friends who have tried this many, many times. It didn't work. You can say whatever you want, but at least they've tried. I think the Europeans now have a greater responsibility to also try, but we have to try that together with all the neighbors, as well as with the Palestinians and the Israelis. But we should not be waiting for this leader or that leader or for the favorite peace partner to come around. We should be working with everyone in the region to see what would we contribute, what would be our homework, what can we do right now to make peace more visible, more attractive, and thereby maybe closer. And while we are doing that, I think we have to do everything we can to preserve the two-state solution. There is no other solution. There are other options, but they are not solutions. So we have to do that, and that means doing the humanitarian work, but also being very clear about illegal settlement building and about changes to the status quo on the holy sites, but also very clear against terrorism and everything that looks like it. We have to preserve that, but at the same time, I want to work very much with you and with all people here that you are here because you are interested and you're involved and you have experience, and maybe some of you have lost family members. Maybe you have lived through this your entire life. I want to work with all people who have that experience, who have those ideas, to build a new peace process. Not in the name of the EU, you just make a small contribution, but we have to do that. We are forced to be optimists, and we are forced to put our energy to it. And then, maybe to conclude, for that reason, I'm not going to express myself on particular labels. And if you follow me on Twitter, you will see sometimes I meet with people. Sometimes I say something, but I am not the biggest critic of either the Palestinians or the Israelis or here or there, because I believe that we have to work on a peace process. There are enough people who are critical, and whether or not I agree with them, that's fine. We have to also keep thinking about not just let's convince people of what I believe, but let's work with whoever to create the end to the conflict. And that's the job that I've been given by the EU.
Thank you. This is why I believe I define myself a European citizen born in Italy, because European Union means something. Gideon, you wanted to follow up?
Just to react on one point, which is a crucial point. You say that the two-state solution is the only solution. I tend to agree with you. It's the most logical solution. Two peoples share one piece of land. Let's split this land, divide this land between the two peoples. The problem is that this train left long time ago the station. And we have to realize, you know the reality on the ground. To speak today about the two-state solution is just to play into the hands of the occupation, just to play into the hands of Israel. Why? Because the two-state solution, people say it died already. I'm not sure it was ever born. But let's say it was born and it died. We are facing a reality in which 700,000 Israeli Jewish settlers are in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem. Never, never will be an Israeli statesman who will be able to evacuate 700,000 Israelis who are the strongest political group in Israel. I understand this sentiment of dreaming about two states. It's really a nice dream. But it's not only about the dream, it's about the damage that we create by talking about this dream as if it is a reality, as if it's possible to achieve it. That's exactly what Israel wants. There is a problem. On the shelf, we have this two-state solution, and one day we can always take it down and use it. So, okay, not this year, next year, not this decade, next decade. We had Arafat, he was too strong. We had Hamas, they are too fundamentalistic. We have Abu Mazen, he's too weak. But finally, it will take place. No, guys. We have to release ourselves from the two-state solution and understand that this solution, I was a great supporter of the two-state solution. But today, to speak about the two-state solution is really saying continue with the occupation. Because the only solution, and it's a very problematic solution, but the only solution left is changing the regime of this one state. Because Israel is already a one state. It's not for the future. Israel is today one state with few regimes. And what we should aim at is changing the regime into a democracy.
Gideon, sorry. Do you want to follow up? Then, so very fast, because then I want to ask you one more question to you as well, because I understand you are going to have an important bilateral meeting, so I want to ask you, and you will leave us, but you are allowed to leave us. You wanted to follow up the questions?
Well, on the 23rd of June, 2020, my own cousin was murdered by the Israeli occupation. He was 26 years old, engaged in a love affair, athlete, murdered on his sister's wedding day. This is not the end of the story. Up until today, his body is still kept in the Israeli refrigerators in the Tel Aviv University. This is not ethical, this is not legal, this is not a humanitarian to say the least. However, Israel is still enjoying every impunity. That's why I think it's important to hold Israel accountable, to look at Israel as the occupation. And you know, when violence rewarded, we cannot imagine for things but to only get worse. Today, what we're witnessing is settler violence on the ground. And I tell you, we're going to see more escalations. We're going to see more killings. Israel needs to be held accountable. And this takes me to the Abraham Accords. As a Palestinian, to be very honest with you, I teach diplomacy, as I said. I respect international relations, foreign affairs, and I understand it very well. So we should not oppose the bilaterals between any Arab country and Israel. They can go to the moon together. But the one thing that we would refuse is that they spin it around our own rights. Like to come at the expense of the Palestinian political, economic, or social rights, or our gas rights now. This should not be tolerated. When they came to the Abraham Accords, they said that they will stop and halt annexation. Welcome to the grounds. Annexation is taking place de facto. Okay, it's not de jure, but Netanyahu is back today, and it is happening. Confiscations are happening. Settlements are happening. Killings are happening on a daily basis. So I want to end on another note, bringing Ukraine to the panel. If there is a people in this whole world, it is the Palestinian people who can empathize and sympathize the most with the Ukrainian people. And here I speak on behalf of my people, because we've been suffering from state-organized violence for 74 years. And here comes the international community reactions. When we see the ethical and legal obligation and responsibility coming towards the people of Ukraine, we respect that. But we also reflect on 74 years of our own sufferings. The sanctions that were imposed on Russia in 3 weeks' time, none of them was imposed on Israel in 74 years. That's why I urge each one of you to take an individual responsibility to remember our own individual roles in bringing change, not only to our smaller communities, but also to the region and to the world. Bringing peace takes responsibility, and it takes moving from the micro step-by-step approach, economy here, investment there, shore here, to really ending the Israeli occupation. The fact that Trump came to his balcony of the White House and recognized Jerusalem as capital for Israel, violating all international laws, all UN Security Council resolutions, the legitimacy of the Oslo Accords itself makes me believe that every president, including the European presidents, can come up to their balcony next morning and recognize the state of Palestine. I'm not a dreamer, I'm a realistic person. Seeing what had happened on the ground had enforced our reality of apartheid. And we as Palestinian people, thank you.
Sorry, Sven, Dalal mentioned Ukraine. I mean, in Europe, because we are a democratic environment, to make a policy, you need popular consensus. Europe now is too busy, perhaps, with Ukraine, the war in Ukraine, and with the issue of the migrants. Is there a following in Europe about the policy toward the Israeli-Palestinian issue?
I would not say that Europe is too busy with other things. In fact, I think the topic of today is very much an EU priority. Now, it is true there are other things happening. But I would say Russia's war in Ukraine is in a very tragic way, let that be very clear. But also a reminder of Europe, or maybe actually a lesson for Europe, that Europe has a big role to play. If I saw the instant mobilization of the EU when this invasion happened, I cannot say I subscribe to everything that you just said, but at least it showed that Europe can do a lot of things at the same time. And I think we need to take that political capital, that will to do things, also to the Middle East peace process, and I actually see that we are doing that. I work a lot with High Representative Borrell, who is very, very involved in all of this. And he's very keen that we take a greater responsibility. Again, we are not going to be the leader of the peace process. We're not going to organize a Camp David around the corner, even though we have some nice corners. But we have a great responsibility to contribute to this, and we can do multiple things at the same time. And let me make clear why. The Middle East peace process, the continued occupation, the conflict as a whole, is for us a conflict between many of our friends. We are friends of the Palestinians, and very strong friends, and we do a lot with them and for them. We are strong friends with Israel and the Israelis, and we do a lot with them. And that has also to do with personal ties and cultural ties and many other things. But it's also about our values. We believe in the security for Israelis and the security for the Palestinians and the Lebanese and Jordanians and everyone around. We believe in rule of law, and we see all the problems. You mentioned a few. I mean, these are very big ones. We believe in the rule of law in our neighborhood, in the whole world, but in our neighborhood, it's closer to us. That is a reason for us to invest in this. Also, it's a source for us of terrorism. Terrorism there, but also terrorism on our side. It's a source of illegal migration. It's a source of economic cooperation. There are many, many reasons why for the EU, this is very important. And so we will keep investing in this. But I would just say this, we will not just keep investing in trying to say the same thing louder, or more often, or stepping over the fact that some member states have nuanced different views than some other member states, because all member states actually still believe in the two-state solution. And I take your point that I would still say there are other options, but they are not solutions. And I don't hear you say that either, so at least let's work on an independent, recognized Palestinian state. We have to keep working on that. I'm not going to hide the fact that it's difficult and that we have political difficulties, but we have a lot of unity and we have a clear goal. And I believe we have lots of people in this room who want the same thing, who, regardless of how they look at the situation of today, they want to get to the same day in the end, the day of peace. And that is a program that is more than just opinions, it's a program of actions about how to take the steps. And my program now is to work with those who are ready, who are willing. Thank you.
No, because I know you have your meeting now.
Yes, sorry.
The time, but very, very short. But you know better than I do that the Israelis relies much more to the United States for political and historical reasons. They don't like us very much.
I don't agree with you, though I understand where you come from. I think on the peace process, the Americans prefer, or sort of the Israelis generally prefer American involvement for obvious reasons. But I think Israeli government, any Israeli government, is very keen to have good ties with Europe. We are their biggest trading partner. We have all the personal ties. There are so many people who have all the passports. And whenever the EU comes up with a new program on education, on innovation, on everything, Israel very much wants to be part of it. And actually, we want Israel to also be part of it. It's only when we start to talk about the Palestinians, then they are not so keen, maybe. At least not all of them. Now, my job is to connect the threads in Europe. To say, no, I mean, we can do lots of things with Israelis, yes, but let's then also discuss the Palestinian issue. By the way, also on the other side. I'm afraid I will have to run because I'm meeting the foreign minister. So
Yes. I dismiss you.
But please forgive me, and it's not an indication that we think this is less important. In fact, that's where I hope to do things, precisely for this reason. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So we have two more questions. So, Gideon. Oh no, Dalal. Yes, come. Let's come closer.
There's already one achievement in this session, that we got closer.
Well, but also Saddam Hussein could deal with you, with the Israeli like you.
And the EU spokesperson said that we're going to move from statements to actions. That's really important.
Exactly.
Inshallah. I'll ask you then if you trust it or not, outside of the records. Dalal, the Palestine dramatically needs an economic development. But are you not afraid that EU, US, UN, IMF, MI5 also perhaps, they are still there, World Bank, etc., are too much focused on aid and too few on your national aspirations?
Yes, I think this is a conclusion that we have to come up to, where World Bank reports and IMF reports since 2010 recognize that the Palestinians had enough institutions to have a recognized independent and sovereign state. Yet, when we went to bid for our right at the UN Security Council and then the General Assembly for a member state status, we did not get but an observer status. So the work that is being done, with all the respect and with all the gratitude to the projects, the streets, the infrastructure, and the different, empowerment for youth and women in Palestine, it's very, very important. But the fact that this is maintaining the status quo is really alarming. And this takes me to the point where, as I just said, the economic path is very important, but it should not come at the expense of the political path.
Sure. Gideon, the Israelis are in denial. I mean, We have 7.4 million Palestinians from the Mediterranean to the Jordan River, more than Israelis already. But the Israelis, no two-state solution, not one-state solution, nothing. I mean, 7.4 million people don't exist for the large majority of the Israelis. Now, you have more elections than in Italy, but in any election, you never discuss about the Palestinian issue. I mean, you discuss about everything but the Palestinians. What is the source of this denial, and what was going to bring this denial?
You see, in the 70s, the joke was that two Israelis have three views. Today, three Israelis don't have one view about the occupation. This is one of the achievements of Netanyahu, but also before him, to put off the Palestinian issue from the table, to put it off. He claims that also in the world he succeeded in putting it off, and now we are facing those Israeli journalists who went to Qatar to cover the World Cup, and they are so shocked. There are all kinds of Arabs who don't like them. How can it be? How can it be that they don't like them, those Arabs? You don't know what's going on now in Israeli media. They call at us Free Palestine. How dare they? We thought that we have them all in our pockets already, Abraham Accords and everything, and all of a sudden they come with the Palestinian flag, all those Arab teams who made it, like Morocco yesterday with the Palestinian flag. So in Israel, it's a process, it's not in one day, but it's an unbelievable process of living in denial, in ignorance. It's not only denial, it's also ignorance. An average young Israeli knows less about the occupation than anyone in this room, and I can guarantee it to you. They know nothing, and what they know is totally biased. The biggest collaborator on this plan is obviously the Israeli media, which is a free media, but when it comes to covering the occupation, it has only one consideration, and this is the economical consideration. Our readers don't want to read, our viewers don't want to see, so we will not show them. So in a week like this week, in which on one of the days, two brothers were killed, two Palestinian brothers were killed, you need really a microscope to find it in Israeli media. Two brothers, both of them teenagers. You can't find even such a story. We believe that if we will not speak about the occupation, if it will not see the occupation, this elephant in the room will not exist. Now, very short, why is it so? Because the truth is that every Israeli deep in his heart knows that something went wrong. And it's very hard to admit it. It's very hard to cope with it. How can you cope with the fact that half an hour away from your home, people are or 1 hour away in the biggest jail in the world, namely Gaza, in a concentration camp? You cannot cope with it on a daily basis. You cannot cope with soldiers who kill children, soldiers who kill women, soldiers who kill innocent people. You cannot live with it. So the psychological process was to deny it, and the media is the biggest agent for this.
You have to sell copies anyway.
Sorry?
You have to sell copies.
Yes. Yeah.
Two last questions, very short. Dalal, you teach conflict resolutions to students that are living in a conflict without solution. How can you deal with this?
This is a dilemma on the personal level, I'll be very frank with you. And one of my students did dare to tell me, are you truly convinced of what you're teaching us? When I teach international law, UN diplomacy, foreign policy, negotiations, it's really, really hard because when it comes to applying theory into practice, our case study is a big failure. And our case study really proves that the mediator or the international community was not really playing conflict resolution or negotiations or mediation when it came to the Palestinian question or to the Israeli-Palestinian peace process. It was mainly what I would call coercive diplomacy in theory. We were coerced for a big, long time at the expense of the Palestinian rights to serve the Israeli interests. So yes, it is very embarrassing for me sometimes, and it is hard to sell to the Palestinian youth and to the Palestinian researchers, this school of thought of mediation, negotiation, because our leadership 3 decades ago promised us, my generation and the newer generation, that we will have dignity, we will have freedom, we will have a state, independence. What do we have 30 years afterwards? Nothing. The situation is deteriorated. The number of settlers has more than tripled. The number of settlements is outrageous. On the ground, all we see is settler colonialism. All we see is crimes against the humanity, against the Palestinian people, apartheid, and all different forms of racist policies under the umbrella of the Israeli occupation. I teach the Harvard School of Negotiations, which is basically the interest-based school of negotiations. And this can explain what's happening in the Middle East, the Abraham Accords, and the normalization agreements. Everybody's running after their own interests on the economic and investment levels. Now, gas deals are being signed between the EU and Israel with the help of all the Arab neighboring countries who have, water shores. Yet, the Palestinians are again excluded. The ethical and legal question of every international member state's responsibility towards this question is not only like if you're pro-Palestinian or pro-Israeli. No. If you're pro-peace, if you're pro-humanity, if you're pro-human rights in the 21st century, then one should say enough to the Israeli impunity, enough to the Israeli crimes. Israel needs to be held accountable. I'm not saying just let's take them to the ICC or whatever. We need justice for the Palestinian people, to say the least.
Shukran. Gideon, my last question to you is not about Israelis, but about the Palestinians. What will happen after Abu Mazen?
I think you should ask Dalal.
No.
First of all, don't panic if you'll hear a bomb all of a sudden, because this screen warns us, time is up, and I'm waiting that it will blow in my face because it's getting hysterical now with these red lights. Look, the Palestinians, I don't like to speak about Palestinians because I'm not Palestinian.
You write every week on Twitter.
No, I write about us, about what we are doing, not about them. I write about our crimes. I document our crimes. I don't write about them. That's their own. I'm also not an expert for sure, not for their politics. I know one thing. The PA is with Abu Mazen or without Abu Mazen in a terrible crisis. They have to find a new way, a new generation. With all the respect, they are all people that did a lot for the Palestinian people. But it's time for new thinking. Because when we face it now, as Dalal said, we see, I don't want to say failure, but because I'm not sure it's their fault. But for sure, there are no achievements. For sure, we are facing an impossible situation. So I don't think that there will be a revolution after Abu Mazen. I think that at least the short period after him, there will be another bureaucrat who will get into this position, someone from the security machinery, who will continue, but it's falling apart. It's falling apart because the split from Gaza. It's falling apart because Israel is doing anything possible that it will fall apart. It's falling apart because there is no clear message. And I repeat again, I would expect also the Palestinians to realize that the dream about the two-state solution cannot be achieved anymore. And let's see the PA speak about one person, one vote. And let's challenge the world. If the Palestinians ask now for one person, one vote, how can Israel say no to it? Security? What? And Israel will have to say no. And then Israel declares itself as an apartheid state. Because if you say no to one person, one vote, you declare yourself as an apartheid state. And my hope is that there will be a new generation. I hear new voices also among the younger generation who understand that the two-state solution is lost. And the real leadership must be now to come out of the ashes with a new message. And the message to the world, to the Palestinians, and to the Israelis must be, let's fight for one person, one vote.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to you. Anyone? As you have perfectly understood, I'll see you in the next 30 years. I will send my son, but the situation will be the same. Thank you very much. Toda rabah, shukran.
Thank you for the way you handled it. Thank you very much.